Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Juanita McKinney, President of the Brookhaven National Laboratory African American Advancement Group. Today, we are hosting the first of our 2022 Black History Month event, Conversation with Walter E. Massey. The AAAG is one of the lab's employee resource groups. We're dedicated to sharing the Black, Caribbean, and African American culture and experience at Brookhaven. We promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we work year-round with laboratory management to facilitate the hiring, retention, education, mentorship, and career advancement of African American talent at all levels. The AAAG is open to all members of the Brookhaven Lab community, and I do hope you'll join us for our meetings, speakers, and other events, not just in February, but throughout the year. Our guest today has made many contributions to our society in both the arts and sciences. In a moment, I'm going to ask Brookhaven Lab's Deputy Director for Operations, Jack Anderson, to speak about Dr. Massey's experience and great leadership. But first, some quick notes on this event. This will be a guided discussion between Dr. Massey and moderators. If members of our audience have any questions, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of the Zoom window to submit. I can't promise we'll have time to get to the Q&A, but we will do our best. And now, let me welcome Deputy Director for Operations, Jack Anderson, to say a few words. Jack, the floor is yours.
Juanita, thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today and have the privilege of introducing our special guest, Dr. Walter Massey. And sometimes people use the phrase Renaissance man or Renaissance woman when describing someone who has a range of very diverse talents. Our guest today certainly characterizes that definition, but more importantly, reminds us of what it means to strive for skills and knowledge, but also for impact. Walter Massey has changed lives and entire communities by way of his leadership and extraordinary ability to bridge gaps among communities. Throughout his decades-long career, Dr. Massey has been dedicated to science and technology as necessary to improve quality of life and public understanding of science and technology as essential to democracy. He's also been dedicated to the arts and the intersections of science, technology, and the arts as critical for innovation. And with all of his work, he's been committed to racial and social equity by ensuring active inclusion, access to quality education, and mentorship for women and underrepresented minorities, particularly in STEM fields. A little bit about Dr. Massey's background. He was born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and at the age of 16, he received a Ford Foundation Fellowship to attend Morehouse College, where he received his bachelor's degree in physics and mathematics. He holds both his master's and doctorate in physics from Washington University in St. Louis, where his thesis was focused on the ground state of liquid helium boson solutions for mass 3 and 4. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Argonne National Laboratory, assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and held professorships in physics at Brown University and the University of Chicago. He later served as the director for Argonne National Laboratory. He is currently board chair of the Giant Magellan Telescope Organization, chair of the City Colleges of Chicago Trustees, president emeritus of Morehouse College, and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And he's a senior advisor to the president and emeritus trustee of the University of Chicago. While director at the National Science Foundation in 1992, he actually helped convince Congress to invest in the largest and most ambitious project ever funded by the NSF, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, or LIGO. Designed and built to detect cosmic gravitational waves that were predicted by Einstein as part of the general theory of relativity, the first waves were detected and reported in 2016. And the following year, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Rainier Weiss, Kip Thorne, and Barry Barish for their decisive contributions to the LIGO detector and the observation of gravitational waves. Dr. Massey's recent awards and honors include the Sigma Xi 2020 Gold Key Award, the National Science Foundation's 2019 Vannevar Bush Award. Dr. Massey is a former vice president of the American Physics Society, chair of the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board, a member of the National Commission on Mathematics and Science Teaching for the 21st Century, member of the President's Council of Advisors of Science and Technology, and he's a co-founder of the National Society of Black Physicists. And today, he's our special guest of the Brookhaven National Laboratories African American Advancement Group for its first major event of Black History Month in 2022. So please join me, albeit virtually, in offering a warm welcome to Dr. Walter Massey. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you, Jack, for that warm introduction. My name is Lisa McGee, and I'm the Vice President of AAAG. I will be introducing today's moderators, Dr. Vanessa Sanders. Vanessa serves as a radiochemist within the Medical Isotope Research and Production Group. And Dr. Kenneth Evans Luderoth is a beamline scientist at the National Synchrotron Light Source 2, both at BNL. So Vanessa and Ken, the floor is yours.
Hi, Dr. Massey. It's a great honor to have you with us today. Your distinguished career has bridged the two cultures of the sciences and arts, the private and public sectors, and academia and industry. You are a world-class educator, a physicist, a business executive, and a philanthropist. I personally would like to take this time to thank you for all of the work you've done over your career, and thank you for paving the way and inspiring someone like me to become a scientist working at a national lab. Dr. Massey, we'd really love to understand, where do you come from? In terms of your childhood, growing up in the Jim Crow South, your family and education, please share with us the importance of your family roots and the education you received at Morehouse College in preparing you for your future.
Thank you, and thank you, Vanessa. So glad to see you in such an important position at Brookhaven. Congratulations on that. I grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi in the 40s and 50s. I was born in 1938. And it was a time of really extreme segregation, almost apartheid-like. I know many of you have read about those times in books and so forth, but to actually have lived through it, it's hard to really appreciate it, hard to recognize it and understand it unless you lived through it. You know, there really were separate fountains labeled colored and white, separate bathrooms. You couldn't shop at certain stores downtown. Movie theaters where you had to go in the back, sometimes go up the fire escape, and only could sit in the balcony. That could be a dangerous time because you had very little recourse of whites, especially, and not so much even the law, just an ordinary white person could do things and you would have no recourse. So it was a difficult time, difficult period. However, I had a happy childhood, and it's often, people often surprised when I say that. And in fact, I've had people say, well, that can't be true. It's just that you've blocked out all of those things, but it is true. You mentioned family, and one reason for that, I had a very close family, but not just my family, it was the extended community of Blacks, what we would call coloreds then, in Hattiesburg. And since everything was so segregated, Blacks had their own communities, and you interacted with white people mostly when you went to work for them, which we did if you had to go downtown for something. But as a child, especially as a young child, I didn't have to do a lot of those things. So as a young child, I spent most of my time within the community. My mother was a school teacher, elementary school teacher, and became and elementary school principals. So she was very dedicated to education and reading. My aunt was a school teacher. My father worked in a local chemical factory, which has a history of its own, a positive history. And so he had a good job, and it was not in an environment where you face constant oppression. The schools are totally segregated. Throughout my entire career, I went to all colored, all Negro then schools. But I received a very good education, and I appreciated that once I went to Morehouse. I went to Morehouse out of the 10th grade. I got a Ford Foundation scholarship. The scholarships were offered nationally, and you took the exams in Mississippi, and I took the exam, and I left out of the 10th grade. And I found that I was pretty well prepared. And then looking back, I could appreciate, we had very good teachers, dedicated teachers, and the teachers were well trained. So it was a kind of fortuitous circumstance that I went to Morehouse. By the way, it's a longer story, and I've written about it, and maybe you can read about it in the book I wrote. But I wasn't even scheduled to take this test for the Ford Foundation because I was not one of the most diligent students. And the teachers picked, 4 or 5 of what they thought were the smartest, most hardworking students. I spent a lot of time playing alto saxophone in a rhythm and blues band rather than buckling down in the books at high school. But I took the exam and I went to Morehouse, and it changed my life. I have no doubt that my life would have been different. I don't know what it would have been. I doubt I would have achieved the things I've achieved without being at Morehouse. We had caring teachers, nurturing teachers, brilliant people. That's why I really learned to love physics. I'd never taken a physics course since I went out of the 10th grade. I liked math. I always liked math. But at Morehouse, I had mentors and tutors, and it gave me this sense of confidence as well as preparing me to go forward. Why don't I stop there on that question? I can't hear you, Kenneth.
Just a minute.
Yeah.
That's the classic mute. So that's actually a nice segue for this question, which is, what intrigued you about science, Dr. Massey? Can you recall any scientific difficulties that you had while conducting research? What advice would you give young researchers starting now? And so that gives you a good chance to talk about the Morehouse and getting into physics part.
As I said, I hadn't taken a physics course, and I hadn't taken chemistry. Well, I may have. No, I think the only course I'd taken was biology. But I liked mathematics, and I don't know if I was necessarily good at it then in high school, but I liked it. And so when I got to Morehouse, I wasn't sure what I'd major in because I hadn't thought about going to college, right? Usually if you go graduate 11th grade, you begin to think about what you want. But it was in April that I received the offer to go to Morehouse, and then in August I was there. So I didn't have time to, my family, neither my family nor our teachers, to think through what I would do. So there I am. I took math courses, and I took a chemistry course from Dr. Henry McBay. Henry McBay in chemistry and in a lot of science is legendary. He trained more Black PhDs in physics, people who went on to get PhDs, than any person in the 20th century, probably even to now. So I took his chemistry course, and I wasn't sure what I'd take. That was the freshman year. And everyone was saying, well, you don't want to take physics. Nobody majors in physics. You don't want to do that. So I said, I'm going to do that. And I did it because I was still trying to prove that I should be at Morehouse, coming from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Well, we had a lot of my classmates were from New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, big cities. And I was a constant butt of jokes. I mean, good natured, but so I said, I'm going to take physics. Well, my first taken the course, I'd never taken trigonometry. I hadn't had trigonometry yet. And immediately we got into vectors.
Right.
Right. I had a wonderful teacher, Sabinus H. Christensen. He was a white Danish, he was American, but a Danish background, Harvard PhD, who became my mentor for life, all of his life, and a close friend. And Chris, as I subsequently called him, tutored me in trigonometry in the after the physics class, sometimes in the evening, so that I could do both the physics and I could try to pass. I got a C+ first semester, and I was overjoyed. I thought that fantastic. At least I passed. But that really got me into physics in the next 4 years. I was the only physics major at Morehouse. So in my latter senior level, junior and senior level courses, I was the only student. It was just me and Chris and I. So I had almost private tutorial education. And so I was very well prepared when I left. And he, as I said, became an advisor and mentor. I had difficulties in science. I had a very good mentor at Washington University also, Dr. Eugene Feenberg. And I thought I would never finish my PhD. I did fine in the courses that, you know, in all the graduate courses, but it seemed like my thesis was going on and on and on. And I thought I would never finish. And I went in to see Dr. Feenberg and said, I think I should just, I don't know if maybe I should quit. And he said, why would you do that? I said, I just don't seem to be getting anywhere. He said, you're doing fine. I said, but it's taking me so long. He said, you're not taking any longer than other people. And this work you're doing is great. And it's going to be monumental. He used those words. And I was almost in tears going, because I thought I couldn't do it. Now, I tell this story because I know so many Black students, even Latino minority students who are in graduate program who have not had that kind of support. In fact, I know some when they went, say, in a similar circumstance, when they would say they were having trouble, the response would be, well, maybe you shouldn't be here. Or maybe this is too difficult for you to do. But it was not what I had. And that's something we might want to talk about, the role and the way PhD advisors or supervisors interact with students instead of being dismissive, skeptical about their abilities, that they are supportive and believe in their students, as Dr. Feenberg did with me. Now, in research, I was working, that was a problem having to do with how phonons travel in liquid helium at low temperatures and superfluid helium. And it was a problem I'd worked on. One of the reasons I went to Argonne was to be a theoretician with a group doing these experiments. And that was anomalous dispersion that couldn't be accounted for by existing theories. And I worked on that quite a while, 2 or 3 years, and then went to Brown, and finally with a colleague, we solved that problem. But that was a problem I had a lot of difficulty with. But it was a great joy in breaking through that. So sometimes having difficulties when you're trying to do something it's not all bad. I learned a lot of other things while trying to figure out this problem. I had to study so many other things that by the time we came up with the solution to this one, I had learned other things that I could then do research on. So what advice for young scientists? You need allies. I was lucky, I had mentors throughout my career. If you don't have them naturally, seek them out. And I was not necessarily just people of your own race or ethnicity, because quite often there aren't that many people when the circumstances, place where you might be. So try to seek out people. And I have found also in life that quite often people are flattered when you ask them for advice when you ask them for direction. The right people. It doesn't happen with everybody, but the right people. And they will respond positively. Also, having allies or colleagues that you can share things with, your science and whatever circumstances you might find yourself in. There are always going to be ups and downs, and I guess the most important lesson you can learn from someone who has had more experience is that when you're down there, it doesn't mean you're down forever. And the big challenge is to work through those periods when it doesn't look like your career is going in the right direction, or it doesn't look like the problem you're working on, you're going to solve it, and you feel stupid. You wonder why you ever got into this field. What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. You'll have those self-doubts, but you stay with it. And most often you can get through those difficult periods.
Thanks. So I agree with you that as an alumna of a historically Black college and university, I agree that attending that institution completely changed the trajectory of my career.
Where did you go to school?
I went to a small HBCU in South Florida. It's Florida Memorial University.
Oh yeah, I know them, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you have served as a president of prestigious institutions like the School of Art Institute of Chicago, as well as Morehouse College. Since you have had the opportunity to serve at both a predominantly white institution, or a PWI, and a historically Black college or university, an HBCU, do you feel that HBCUs can play a greater role in increasing the diversity on the scientific level at national labs? And how does this compare to the role of PWIs?
Well, I was dean of the college at Brown, and I was provost of the University of California system. And in fact, I spent most of my career, after I graduated from Morehouse, I spent all of my career in PWIs and major research universities. I only went to the Art Institute after I retired from Morehouse. HBCUs have always played a major role. I don't know the numbers now, but for most of my career, the majority of people who went on to get PhDs came and had undergraduate degrees from HBCUs. So they've always had an important role in producing people who went on to become scientists or in other fields. So that they continue to do that. What I'm finding very satisfying now and gratifying is that there's a kind of resurgence in interest in HBCUs, and they're getting more publicity and visibility than I think they've had maybe since prior to the civil rights movement, when there was still segregation. And what's happening is people are finding out now, people who didn't appreciate it before, just how important these institutions are and the quality of their education. I know at Argonne, where I still keep in touch with people there very closely, that they are reaching out to try to form partnerships with HBCUs. And I've heard that other labs are doing that also. I think these are great opportunities. Now, what I caution the group at Argonne about is, if you're going to do this, have any relationship and establish partnerships, to really go in with a clear-eyed understanding of what you need to do, and also a commitment to be in there for a extended period, because nothing's just going to happen overnight. Being on the other side, being at an HBCU like Morehouse, what you are exposed to and experience a lot is these institutions, majority white, or the national labs, or industry. They come in, they have an idea, and they have a program, and they start it up, and then the guy or woman who started that leaves, or something happens, a DOE discontinues the funding for that program. and then it ends. And the president or the science faculty at the school, then they are left with these students who they got in, or faculty whom they got engaged in these programs. They're sort of left hanging, and it leaves a bitter taste. And that's happened a lot. It's happened enough that people are very skeptical and cynical. Cynical implies it's their fault. I'm very skeptical when these groups come in from outside saying, you know, here, we are from Brookhaven, we want to help you poor people. That is not the attitude, as you probably know. So it takes a while. You have to establish trust between the faculty, especially at the HBCUs, and your institution. You have to make sure, let's say if you were doing this, Vanessa, Kennedy, you don't also want to be put in a position where you go down and establish relationships because you're an alumnus or you know HBCUs, and then the lab is not behind you long term. So I guess if Jack's still on here, you have to make sure the leadership of the lab is committed to a long-term investment and partnership. I'll stop. I could go on and on about this because I've been through it so many times.
Yeah.
However, you should do it.
Okay.
You know, given I don't want to sound discouraging. I just want to point out, be pragmatic and point out what's one thing to do. And
So,
I heard who was that was saying there now the support groups, at least in the African American support groups like yours, and maybe others, are establishing relationships with the other national labs. I think it would be. I think that's great. And what I have not seen, and I didn't see in my time as president of Morehouse, I've seen, is having a multi-lab approach to have foreign programs, so students have more choices. Now, back in probably when I was at Morehouse, it was in the 90s and early 2000s. Lawrence Livermore they had I thought, a very fantastic program. They had a woman there, an African-American woman, who's just a dynamo. And she did establish networks with the other labs and had some very productive programs. I don't think it's still going on.
So the next question is actually a little bit, I think you already got into this a little bit, but I'll still ask it. And you know, in the first, what you were just talking about was a little bit more from the point of view of being on the faculty at the HBCUs. But let's now look at it a little bit from the National Lab's point of view, because so you were one of the few, if not the only, African-American directors in charge of a national lab. It seems that most national labs have a diversity challenge, yet the labs are very cautious about implementing activities that will help diversity. It appears that the labs are concerned with attracting adverse congressional attention to any actions the lab may take. What initiatives could we in this case being staff members at the national labs, what initiatives could we advocate for that will not attract negative attention, but will nevertheless give positive change in diversity at the labs?
Well, I think I was the first lab director, African American, but Bill, and I've forgotten Bill's name, he was director of P&L when I was there, so that was, at least we overlap. I'm not quite sure I understand the negative publicity issues, and I never experienced that. So could you, what do you mean by that?
Well, it just seems that the labs don't seem to. I think that just my impression, they seem to be concerned about doing something positive, right? So they hesitate at say creating initiatives that would help attract African American students or other underrepresented staff to increase the diversity. And so we have a hard time getting some things going. And as you were saying earlier on, all of a sudden the funding gets cut, right, for some of these programs that get started. And often it's because somebody asked a question and someone panicked and said, let's put a hold on that.
I haven't had that experience, and I don't recall speaking with others about it. That may be true. I don't think, even if it is true, I don't think that's the main impediment.
Okay.
The concern about image. I think the primary impediment is lack of incentives. So what's it, if I'm going to do this, say you, Jack, others in leadership, then what, unless I'm a person who's personally committed to this in my own life and career, that I want to do something, then why should the lab do it? It's not going to increase your funding. And the labs, as we know, the laboratories have very little discretionary funding. I mean, they can take a certain percentage for the internal R&D. And everything comes through programs, right? And so if your program officers or people in DOE, what's in it for them? They don't get any credit. So the system sort of makes it difficult unless you're really somebody who has some control over resources is really willing to invest them. There was a period when DOE actually funded these kinds of programs and funded education directly from the Secretary office, when Admiral Watkins, I believe, was the Secretary of Energy. But I don't think that's true now. Is it, Jack? I don't think it's true. But the laboratories have to have an incentive. Now, fortunately, I believe that the climate is such that laboratories do feel that they should be part of the change that people are trying to bring about for various reasons. They want to attract some of the best people. You know, they're competing for other institutions. And I don't think I'm naive. I think you're finding there are more and more people of all races, whites, who really want to be in institutions where equity and inclusion are part of the fabric of the institution. I mean, some brilliant people who are doing great science, and the labs have to compete for them. And in this administration, who knows how long it would last, there's a great deal of emphasis at the top, from the president through the secretary, on these issues. So I think it's a time when one ought to really try to push very hard, because you don't often get these windows where everything is kind of aligned. You know, there's, I think the public recognition of the importance of diversity. There's political power behind it, and there are some incentives for attracting very good people. So I think it's a good time, Kenneth, to do this, and push it and see how far it goes. It would be my advice. Push the program. Have what you would not like is for people who have the resources and the power to say, well, I don't have the ideas. No one's coming to me with the ideas.
Thanks.
This is Jack. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I accept the invitation from Dr. Massey to weigh in on that. And then to Ken's point, I haven't seen the barrier or the obstruction that you were saying. I think it does come back to what Dr. Massey was saying is really building the relationship the right way so that it convinces everyone that it's sustainable for the long term, and finding where we can make those connections the right way so that there's the strong rapport, and then everybody's willing to step in. But I think there's really, it's a great time right now to really take advantage of it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jack, for the extra input. So it just
It's
sounds
still
like,
being recorded too, right?
yeah, it's being recorded, so we got him.
You have it on tape.
On the record.
So it sounds like we just need to start giving up ideas, and so we can work through what's sustainable. So kind of switching gears a little bit, moving from your leadership positions in academia and at the National Lab, you have also served as either a board member or the director of boards for many companies and organizations. What are your thoughts on the importance of young underrepresented minorities serving as board members, and how can early career professionals position themselves to become members of these boards?
Well, I wouldn't have as a goal becoming a board member if I were, when you're a young scientist. I think your primary concern should be, being as good as you can be in that field. And this is the kind of thing that emerges, I think, later in one's career. So having said that, it's certainly, I always found my engagements to be very rewarding. I learned a lot, made colleagues and relationships in areas that I never would have known people from those areas and background. And I just became a much more knowledgeable person. I think it helped me in so many ways. And then I have learned a lot about how businesses operate, which certainly has helped me in my academic administrative positions, like being president of a college and those kinds of things, because a lot of the things you do in a corporation or in a laboratory or in a college are very similar. You need to do strategic planning, you have to do finance, you have to really learn how to understand finances, you have to understand people. All of those things are independent of whether it's a national lab, a McDonald's, or a Morehouse College. So a lot of those kinds of issues are important for any kind of institution. I think it's important for America, for the country, that these boards are more diversified. And it can be important for minorities because you get access to a world where many of us never see. And it really is important to be inside. You can make changes, you can try, you can push, the levers, things you can weigh in on, try to influence, that you aren't even aware that these things exist, if you're not there on the inside. So it's important to have people for that reason. So I've been involved now in organizations that are trying to identify and mentor and prepare younger, here I'm speaking of people in their late 30s, 40s, early 50s, prepare them to join corporate boards, be selected, and bringing them to the attention of leadership of these corporations.
Thank
I'll
you.
leave it at that. Mm-hmm.
So the next question is, so increasing the diversity of scientific staff is difficult in a national lab. The process of creating trained scientists at that level is long and a grueling process. And in this country, that process has always been through an educational system that's been sort of exclusionary, starting right at the beginning of the kindergarten level. What are your thoughts on this issue? And should the labs act with any urgencies, establish any programs to try to solve their diversity problem? Or should they just simply wait for the societal education system to become less exclusionary?
That's a good question. I think we've covered some of that. You have to say, what is the mission of a national laboratory? They're not universities, they're not colleges, they're not high school. So it would not it wouldn't be unreasonable for one to say, well, other institutions do that, and that's not our mission. So the best thing we can do is to be open and willing to accept people when they are ready, when other institutions have educated them. And if we do that, and if we have partnerships with other institutions, colleges, that's our role. And if we can just concentrate on being a place where individuals can come, then we can then help them become really mature scientists. That's our role. So I wouldn't disparage that position. However, having said that, I think the labs can be more influential in prior stages. The laboratories have some advantage over universities in that they are visible places where important research that's critical to the nation's progress is done, and it's visible. That's their mission. The laboratories are not just think tanks. I mean, they are places that pursue cutting edge science through big facilities, but also that work on problems that are important for society. I mean, that's why the government supports these places. And I think a number of people, and I found in my career, especially a number of individuals from underrepresented groups, really want to have careers that they think make a difference in society. And if they can see that you can go into science, you can do science, and you can also have a career where you are making a difference in society, you're working on problems that are important to the future, the world, that can be attractive. I've always thought that, and I still think that. So I think the labs could have a great influence by establishing programs with youngsters. I don't know what you do in the community there around Brookhaven, but I know, Jack, you were at Fermilab. I was there, and Leon Letterman, who's director then, had Saturday classes for youngsters, I think even junior high school, who would come out to Fermilab on weekends, see what the scientists were doing, have lectures, participate in activities, and so forth, and began to see what science is really like at a very young age. And I know at Argonne, they're beginning to try to establish these kinds of things also. So it's an important question, Kenneth. And as I said, one could reasonably wind up on both sides of that issue, but I think the side I just elucidated is one I would advocate.
Okay, so thank you for answering all these questions. I found that there have been many times in my career, though it being short, I have been approached by people in professional environments, and they don't think that I'm a PhD scientist. Instead, they assume that I'm working in some other position. Has this happened to you in your career? And what advice could you give on how to deal with these type of situations?
Yes, it happened. Well, first of all, the advice is to disabuse them of the notion that you're not a PhD by telling them, but or ignoring it, depending on. I know it's easy to say, but I think you should. The first time it happened, I was a postdoc, a staff scientist at Argonne. As I said, I was doing this work on liquid helium. But I was a colleague of mine who had a PhD in organic chemistry, was working out at Sinclair Research. And we were tutoring young students on a program here in Chicago who were elementary and junior high school students. And we would go tutor them in math in the evenings in this program. And I I said, asked them had they ever seen a national laboratory, even knew what it was. They did not. So I arranged to take a group of them out to Argonne. And we took them out to Argonne. And we gave them a tour of the lab. And we went into places. I showed them my office, my research. And we were coming out. They were so awed by this. And they said, all this time I told them I worked at Argonne. They said they thought I was a janitor.
Wow.
I mean, but so even, you know, that, even the black kids, I just never mentioned I worked at Argonne. I probably said what I did, but their range of experience or having the lack of role models in their lives is such that it never occurred to them.
Right.
I mean, I probably said I was doing science, but they didn't hear it. You know, they couldn't see it. They just couldn't see that someone like myself could be doing science. That doesn't relate so much to your experience, but it relates to the other issues we're speaking about. Having people, young people at a young age begin to understand what science can do and who can do it.
Right.
So that people like them can do it. I'm sure many times in my career and life, I've had this kind of reactions that you've encountered. I can't remember any one particular. I've had more of those kinds of misperceptions just in general in life. I was going to get an honorary degree from Columbia University once. And with my wife and I were going to a black tie dinner. We were staying at this fancy hotel, the Carlisle in New York. And I came down in my tuxedo, waiting on the limo to pick us up and take us to Columbia. And as I'm waiting on the limo, my wife's to the side, this little woman, white woman, came up and said, "Could you get me a taxi, please?" I mean, and those kinds of things happen. But I learned to laugh at them. I said, "No, I cannot, but that's the guy who can get you one." You're going to have those things.
Yeah.
Those things are just going to happen. And unless it's malicious, the only person who will be hurt by it is you. And the only reason you're going to be hurt by it is you will let it hurt you. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of might become, I'm saying this now like it's so natural, but I've been through it. Right. But I learned later, certain things you just have to learn to let go of, ignore it, laugh at it, because you're the one carrying it around. The person who has insulted you, they're gone. They're often living their life. They are not wandering around, "Oh my God, did I insult that woman?" Whereas you are carrying this burden, of hurt, the disillusionment around. You just learn to get over it, and because it hurts you more than it doesn't hurt anybody else.
Thank you.
Okay.
So it's 12:45, and I'd like to introduce Tony Jones, Head of Labor Relations Manager, who will be host for the next section of this event. Thank you very much for the answers.
Thank you, Kenneth. And again, thank you for being here, Dr. Massey. I have to say that that I had a premonition and knew that we were going to run out of time, because I knew that you were going to be so brilliant and so engaging that it was just going to come to this point. You know, Dr. Massey, you have touched.
You know, I was going to talk too much. That's what you did.
No, Doctor, that we were going to want to keep you for so much longer is really what it is. You've touched on so many things, you know, Dr. Massey. You know, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I have friends that are still in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I'm from Chicago. You know, my son, as I told you before, went to Morehouse. My wife, you know, Dr. Antonia Jones, well, she's not a doctor yet. She's working on her doctorate that has to do with the morphine that Black African American women have to go through in order to reach the C-suites, in the corporations that we have now, which is something Dr. Vanessa brought up. So, I mean, you're touching so many parts of us. So let me quickly go. And for those of you that are online, we have a link where you can go to see Dr. Massey's book, which is called In the Eye of the Storm, which has to do with his time as chairman of the Bank of America during America's worst financial crisis. And with that, I'm going to ask this question, Dr. Massey. Now, we know that you said you have to get out of here at 1 o'clock, and we're going to try our best to get you, out of here. The one question was, what were one or two of the most challenging aspects of addressing the worst financial crisis in this country when you were at Bank of America?
Oh, well. First, let me say a little about this book, because the title and a theme is during my period when I was chairman of the bank during this financial crisis. But the book, actually, I talk a lot about growing up in Mississippi, being director at Argonne, and I touch on some of the issues we talked about today. So it's not all about my being chairman. That's the sort of through story, but I do flashbacks. So if those of you who might be interested in the things we're talking about, I do touch on those. The most challenging role I had as chairman of the board, and as you read about in this book, I was elected chairman totally unexpectedly, and immediately was thrown into this maelstrom where a situation where I had to help lead the change in the board of directors. I had to ask people, I had to help reconstitute the board of directors. They had to change a lot of the inner workings of the bank at the insistence of the Federal Reserve. Had to deal directly with the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Treasurer in carrying out activities to make the bank stronger, and I do that in a situation where you're never sure if the bank might have failed, that several other banks might have failed, have been nationalized, and it was a very trying and frustrating period, probably a year, the most just trying and frustrating period that I have been through. However, as I write about in here, I found that I was able to do some of those things because of the experiences that I had had in previous positions, like being director of Argonne, where there, my first year, second year, we had to lay off 800 people because Reagan came and President Reagan wiped out all our programs in environmental sciences and renewables. I had to really learn nuclear energy. I was a constant desk matter physicist because 3 Mile Island, the almost meltdown there happened. My first month, 2 months before I took the job, and since Argonne was a leading lab in the country in reactor physics, we were drawn into that political and scientific debates on the future of nuclear energy in the country. And I had to learn all of those issues. So I had gone through other things, which when I look back, helped prepare me for going through the Bank of America crisis. The most important thing that helped me get through it was that I had learned how to work with people. I had learned how to establish relationships, partnerships. I'd learned what it means to be a leader in a time of crisis. And that has a lot to do with how you relate to people, how you build trust among people who work with you and for you. So those are the important lessons that I write about, which I think are applicable to any institution and wherever you might be playing a leadership role. I mean, even if it's a small scientific group, 10, 11 people, or even if it's 8,000, like the Bank of America, 300,000. When you really have to get something done that requires other people doing the work and you're leading, the people have to trust you, that you know what you're doing and that you have their best interests at heart while you're trying to carry it out.
Thank you, Dr. Massey. Another question. When you say the right people will be happy to give you advice, how do you determine who are the right kinds of people?
That's a very good question, and you'll make mistakes. You know, you might get disappointments. You'll reach out to someone and they just may not be open or willing for various reasons. It doesn't always have to be racist, and they just may not take the time. I think the way you try to determine that, you observe, you see how they deal with other people. You maybe have what I might call minor interactions with them. Maybe ask a few questions if you have a chance when you're around them. Strike up conversations. It's almost like courting or something. You work sort of gradually to get to see what the people are like in other circumstances, and then maybe ask them to do something very minor. You have a problem you want to deal. Do you mind my asking you about this? I've been thinking about this. What do you think about that? Mm-hmm. And then you begin to see whether this is the kind of person you might be able to risk reaching out to. And it can be a risk. Mm-hmm. It can be a risk because, the person can, first, two things could happen. They may sort of rebuff you, which can be painful, or they may engage you without and they're not sincere about it, mm-hmm. which is probably worse. It'd probably be better if they just rebuff you. But they engage you, and then when you have difficult issues that they can help you with, they're sort of not there. They didn't realize they were going to take on this kind of time. They weren't really prepared and sincere. But I think it's worth the risk, son. I would not be where I am, and I would bet most people would not, unless you have the help of others and mentors. And the mentors do other things. They don't only become important to you, and helping you figure out things you need to figure out. They open doors. Mm-hmm. They talk about you to other people. They know you as somebody now in a position of influence who say, I've gotten to know this young woman, man over here, very, very bright. Do you know them? No, was person, that kind of thing. So it's worth it. Okay. But there's no light on their heads, right? A little thing you can push where it lights up. That's a good mentor.
So I hear you saying, Dr. Massey, it's more of an art than a science, right?
I think that's exactly. Most human relations, I found.
Yes. So Dr. Massey, even though we love to keep you here, it's 11:58. I'm going to turn this, back over to our president, Juanita McKinney, and she can take it from there. Thank you so much, Dr. Massey.
Thank you, guys.
Juanita? Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm turning it back to you. Yes.
Thank you so much, Tony. Dr. Massey, we cannot tell you how honored we are to have you with us today. Thank you for virtually gracing the Brookhaven National Laboratory stage today. We wish we could just go on and on and on and just listen to all your insights. And I just want you to know that we are celebrating you. We're celebrating your many achievements. You are such an inspiration to so many. Thank you so much. I'd also like to.
I want to say something. Okay. I wish I had time to ask the questions of all of you, because you clearly have had fascinating backgrounds. and are doing wonderful things now. So you have to invite me to Brookhaven when this pandemic allows it. I haven't been to Brookhaven in, probably 30 years. So I would love to come and see what you guys are doing and to meet you personally. All right?
We will absolutely do that, Juanita. We will do that, Dr. Massey. Absolutely.
And
Thank
Dr.
you.
Massey, on behalf of Brookhaven National Lab and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, we offer that, or we extend the offer to visit Brookhaven National Lab once we have lifted the restrictions for visitors. And we look forward to meeting you in person.
Wonderful. All right.
One more thing. I just wanted to say that our director could not make it, Dune Gibbs, earlier, but he is here today. I'm not sure if he's there. He is.
Hi, Dr. Massey. Thank you for coming. And I know you have to go. It was a wonderful session.
Wonderful. Good luck, lab
Thank
director.
you so much.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our moderators, Tony, our producer, George, Mary Rogers, and Lisa McGee for helping organize it. William Safer, Jack Anderson, Dune Gibbs, Noel. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming.